Twilight Fables, where classic tales twist into shadows and folklore speaks through the dark. Tonight, we begin a new story, one of old spirits, forbidden trees, and the girl who heard them whisper. This is the haunting tale of Nokomis, inspired by the legend of Pocahontas. The old ones warned of a voice beneath the earth. Nokomis first heard it the day her mother died. It was a brittle, rasping thing, like wind combing through dead leaves, like the clatter of dry bones sliding beneath moss. Her mother had been sick for many moons, her eyes fogged with fever, and a breath carrying the scent of decaying cedar. As the village healer chanted softly and the fire crackled, Nokomis knelt beside the dying woman's body, and from the roots beneath their lodge floor, she heard the whisper, "She is not yours." Nokomis froze. Her eyes darted toward the others, but no one stirred. Not the healer who sprinkled ashes into the flames, not the mourning aunties who hummed low, sorrowful tunes, not even her younger sister, asleep in the corner, wrapped in bearskin. The voice had not come from above or within. It had risen from below, and just like that, her mother's eyes opened for the last time. They were not glassy with death, but bright, too bright, as though something had stolen into her before her final breath. "Nokomis," her mother whispered, "stay out of the roots. Do not listen to them." And then she died. Grief in Nokomis village was a quiet, reverent thing. There were no wails, no frantic rituals. Her people believed the dead should pass gently, like mist through pine. Instead of screaming or tearing their hair, they gathered in silence, offering gentle words and letting the wind carry sorrow to the spirits. That night, Nokomis sat by her mother's wrapped body, tracing the lines in the old woman's hands, memorizing each wrinkle as the fire's light flickered across her still features. She listened for the voice again, but none came. But she could feel something beneath her, a hum in the soil, a thrum in the bones of the floor, something waiting. That morning, the village rose early. They burned cedar and sage, painting their foreheads with ash. The burial rites required a walk through the fog toward the silent wood, where the ancestor tree waited at the forest's edge, ancient, gnarled, and hung with the wind chimes of those who had gone before. Only the dead were permitted near its roots, but Nokomis insisted on carrying her mother's body herself. "I am her blood," she said, when Elder Tokwa offered to take her place. "Let me be the one." No one argued. The fog was thick that morning, curling low and pale across the water and drifting between the trees, like ghosts with nowhere left to go. Each step Nokomis took along the mossy trail seemed to pull her deeper into another world, quieter, older, listening. When she reached the tree, she knelt, laying her mother's wrapped body in the hollow at its base. There was a moment of stillness. Then, as she scattered ceremonial leaves, 5 from ash, 5 from yarrow, 5 from bloodroot. A chill swept through the air. The wind howled low through the branches like a long exhale, and from below her it came again. She was never yours, and neither are you. Nokomis turned, heart pounding. There was no one, only the tree, only the roots. That night, Nokomis did not dream. Instead, she woke just before dawn, throat dry, breath caught in her chest. Her hands trembled as she dipped them into the basin of river water beside her sleeping mat, as if trying to scrub away a feeling she couldn't name. But the dreams came the next night, and every night after. She walked a path in the forest, barefoot, the earth soft beneath her feet. Bones jutted from the moss, not scattered, but arranged, spirals, rings, symbols she couldn't understand. Trees leaned toward her, their trunks twisted unnaturally, their leaves whispering words in no tongue she knew. In every dream she saw it, the white deer. It stood still and silent, its body made of frost and moonlight, its eyes watching. Behind it, always in shadow, was the figure of a man, tall, pale-skinned, draped in cloth, not woven from any plant. Nokomis recognized. His eyes were burning coals. His hands dripped with something dark. He never spoke. She always woke before he could. The elders dismissed her questions with gentle words. "The forest is testing you," said Elder Tokwa. "It does this to those it favours or fears." But Elder Miska, who was nearly blind, and whose skin hung from her bones like old bark, took Nokomis aside after the 4th night. "You've heard it," Miska whispered, her voice like the rustling of paper, "the thing beneath the roots." Nokomis nodded slowly. "I heard it too," Miska said. "When I was your age, when the first ship came, all bone and fire, the men it carried had no smell. Their words were sharp. They gave beads and metal tools, but they took the land spirit with them. They thought they could tame the forest. What happened to them?" Nokomis asked. Miska leaned close, her breath sour with herbs. "The forest buried them." Nokomis swallowed. "Why me?" "Because you hear it. That means it wants you." Miska's milky eyes clouded darker for a moment. "You are bound now, child. Be careful what bargains you make." 3 days later, the river changed. Where it once flowed clear and cold, now it ran sluggish, cloudy. The fish caught were smaller. The birds had gone silent. And then, at dawn, a shadow appeared on the water. It was not a canoe. It was a ship. A monstrous thing, taller than the trees, with wings of white stretched tight against wind. It glided silently toward shore, cutting through the mist like a ghost come to claim its due. The village gathered at the water's edge, murmurs thick in the air. They had heard of such ships before, tales passed down like bad omens. Spirits of the ocean, bone shells that spat thunder. Some said they were men, others said they were demons. When it docked, several pale men emerged, wrapped in metal and wool, their skin like the underbelly of a fish. They smiled, but it was a strange smile, wide and without warmth. One of them stepped forward, holding up a hand in greeting. The villagers remained still. Then Nokomis stepped forward. She had not meant to. Her legs moved as if pulled by a thread. The man looked at her, really looked, and smiled. His hair was yellow like corn silk. His eyes were fire under ice. And when he spoke, it was in a language she did not know, but in her head she heard the whisper, "Bring him to us." In the days that followed, the strangers remained. They built small fires on the edge of the river. They traded copper, beads, sharp blades. They spoke in broken phrases, trying to mimic the village's language. Some of the villagers warmed to them, curious about their strange tools and strange ways. But Nokomis kept her distance. The man, the one with the fire eyes, watched her wherever she went. He called himself Thorne. His voice was soft but wrong, like someone playing music without ever having heard it. He offered her a stone pendant one evening, etched with unfamiliar symbols. She refused it. He smiled wider. "You see me," he said, in nearly perfect words. "How do you know our tongue?" Nokomis asked, heart pounding. He tilted his head. "Because I've spoken with your forest." She took a step back. He took one forward. "I saw you in my dreams," he whispered, "by the white deer." That night, Nokomis ran. She left the village after the fires dimmed, barefoot in the cold dew, the stars sharp above her. She ran to the ancestor tree, heart hammering, every branch overhead seeming to reach for her like fingers. She knelt at the base, placing both hands on the earth. "Why him?" she whispered. "What do you want?" The earth groaned beneath her. A root burst through the soil. It slithered up her arm, curling like a vine, then tightened. She gasped, not in pain, but in understanding. And then the whisper came, not in words, but in memory. Images, buried bones, pale hands tearing roots, fire in the sky, screams without breath, a heart cut from a tree and buried under black water, and the face of the man, Thorne, standing beside her, ageless, smiling, holding the white deer by the throat. Then the whisper returned, "Bring him to us, or we will take you instead." The root left no mark on her skin. When Nokomis returned to the village at dawn, her arms bore no trace of what had coiled around her the night before, but the sensation lingered, as if something beneath her skin still pulsed in time with the forest's heartbeat. She had barely slept. Her mind played the images over and over. The white deer strangled, the buried heart, Thorne smiling beside the twisted roots, and the voice's demand, "Bring him to us, or we will take you instead." She hadn't told anyone, not her auntie, who noticed her pale face and trembling hands, not her sister, who clung to her in the mornings since their mother's death, not even elder Miska, who watched Nokomis now like a raven studying a corpse, as if she knew time was running short. The forest had claimed her. She was certain of it, and whatever it wanted blood. That day, Thorne approached her again. He brought with him 2 other men, one with a red beard and loud laughter, the other silent, with eyes like carved glass. The villagers stood at a wary distance, watching, arms crossed, children peeking from behind skirts and doorways. Thorne spoke first. "We bring gifts," he said in practiced words, kneeling and opening a sack. From it he pulled strange things, metal spoons, a looking glass, a bundle of cloth with colours Nokomis had never seen. The silent man set down a long knife, its edge sharp enough to cut wind, and gestured toward her. Nokomis said nothing. Instead, she looked past them, toward the trees. The wind had stilled. The branches did not move, but in her head the whisper came again. "He belongs here no more than you do." She turned her gaze back to Thorne. "Why are you really here?" Thorne smiled. "To learn, to trade, to share peace." But his eyes said otherwise. They gleamed too brightly. They drank in every detail around them. The layout of the homes, the rhythm of the people, the songs they sang at sunset. And Nokomis realized something chilling. He was not curious. He was calculating. That night, the drumming began. It started at the edge of the forest, a slow, hollow rhythm, like a heartbeat echoing through the dark. Nokomis sat bolt upright in her mat, breath caught, ears straining. No one else stirred. She stepped outside her lodge. The moon was high, casting everything in silver. The forest loomed still and black, but the drumming did not stop. She followed it, past the edge of the village, down the path toward the ancestor tree. Her feet moved without her will. Each step matched the beat. And then silence. She was in a clearing she didn't recognize. The trees here bent toward each other, forming a dome overhead, their branches woven like fingers clasped in prayer. At the center stood a shallow pool of black water. Something moved beneath the surface. Nokomis crouched, staring into the ripples, and saw herself, but not as she was. This reflection had white eyes, bark cracked down her cheeks. Her hair was longer, matted with leaves, and her mouth opened slowly, whispering words Nokomis couldn't hear. A voice behind her broke the trance. "You shouldn't be here." She turned. Elder Miska stood at the edge of the clearing, leaning on a twisted staff. "How did you... You're walking their path now," Miska said, voice flat. "They're calling you deeper." Nokomis swallowed. "Why me?" "Because your mother once refused them," Miska said. "She was born to them, raised to listen, but she chose life over the forest. She chose you." Nokomis stared. "What are they?" Miska looked toward the water. "Old things, not gods, not spirits. They are the memory of the land made hungry. They remember every betrayal, every root ripped, every bone buried wrong. She stepped closer, placing a hand on Nokomis' shoulder. And now they remember him. Over the next days, Nokomis watched the villagers change. Some welcomed the strangers more openly, curious about their tools, their cloth, the thunder sticks they kept locked in wooden crates. Others grew uneasy. The hunters said the deer had vanished. The fish tasted wrong. Children began waking with nosebleeds and dreams of teeth in the trees. And always, Thorne watched her. He asked questions no outsider should know. Why do you bury your dead near the tree? What lies beyond the northern ridge? What grows beneath the bloodroot patches near the sacred pool? Nokomis deflected, but his eyes never left hers. He was searching for something old, something buried, and the forest knew it. It came again, the dream. But this time, Nokomis was not in the forest. She was underground. Roots coiled around her arms and neck like vines made of sinew. She couldn't move, could barely breathe. The walls pulsed around her like a throat swallowing her deeper. Above her, the white deer screamed, not like an animal, but like a woman. And beside it stood Thorne. He held a blade carved from bone, its hilt wrapped in red string. He turned toward her and smiled, but his smile cracked. His face split down the middle, revealing bark beneath, insects crawling from his mouth. The whisper came again. He is not one, he is many. She woke, choking, hands clawing at her neck. There was blood on her fingers, and the white deer's scream still echoed in her ears. By the next day, the elders called a meeting. The forest was growing restless. Trees were shedding leaves out of season. Crops withered. One of the children had vanished. Found the next day, curled beneath a tree, eyes wide, mouth full of dirt, unable to speak. They bring sickness, said Elder Tokwa. They must leave, but others were uncertain. They offered tools, protection, said another. We are few, they are many. Nokomis stood at the edge of the circle, listening. Then, without knowing why, she stepped forward. I will go with them, she said. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Thorne, standing nearby, looked up sharply. I will learn what they seek. I will stop it. The elders murmured, some in horror, some in hope, but Miska only closed her eyes. They will take something from you, she whispered, and give you something worse. That night, Nokomis stood at the edge of the strangers' camp. The forest was silent, too silent. Thorne approached her alone. You've decided, he said. I have. He studied her, eyes flickering. There is something inside you, he said at last. It sings to me. She said nothing. He smiled and offered her a small carved object, a figure made of ashwood, shaped like a woman with roots for legs. Nokomis reached for it. As her fingers touched the carving, pain lanced through her arm. She gasped, dropping it, but Thorne caught it mid-air, smiling wider. Now you're marked, he said softly. Now the forest will know where to find you. She took a step back. What are you? He leaned in. A mirror, he said. A memory. A mistake you haven't made yet. And then he walked into the trees. Later that night, Nokomis returned to the sacred pool. The reflection was waiting, but this time it did not whisper. It smiled and opened its eyes. They were thorns. The trees were singing, not with birdsong or wind, but with voices, low and layered, humming from deep beneath the bark, like a chorus trapped underground. Nokomis heard them in her bones now, in the thrum of her blood, in the quiet between each heartbeat. The figure of the woman carved from ash, the one Thorne had handed her, would not burn. She had tried, first in her cooking fire, then in the ceremonial flame of the burial lodge, then under the smoke of crushed sage. But each time the flames bent away from the figure as though repelled. The roots at its base writhed if left too long in the heat. Once it even screamed, not loudly, just enough for her to wake in the middle of the night and find it had moved. It now sat beside her mat, staring. Nokomis had been staying at the visitors' camp for 3 days. Her presence had put some of the villagers at ease, enough for wary trade to resume. Others still glared at her when she passed, muttering about betrayal, about spirits, turning her from within. And perhaps they were right. She didn't feel like herself anymore. The food tasted like ash. Water rolled strangely down her throat. Her dreams no longer stopped at the waking line. Now they bled into the morning, images flashing behind her eyes, even while she walked. The white deer impaled on a totem pole, her sister's face, hollowed out and made of bark. Thorne's hands plunged deep in the soil, pulling out something that looked like a human heart, but throbbed like it was still alive. The earth was changing. She could feel it, and the forest had begun to whisper new names, not just her own, but Thorne's. On the 4th morning, a storm came, not a natural one. The sky cracked open without warning, wind shrieking through the trees like banshees, though no rain fell. Trees bent backward at unnatural angles. Birds dropped from the sky mid-flight, their bodies stiff and broken. Thorne stood in the middle of the camp, arms outstretched, letting the wind tear through his coat. "It's begun," he said, smiling like a man greeting a long-lost friend. Nokomis staggered toward him, hair whipping around her face. "What is this? What have you done?" "It isn't me," he said. "It's them. They're waking up." And then the wind stopped, just like that. Not slowed, not faded, stopped, as if someone had closed a door, and from the forest came a sound like cracking bones. The trees had moved, not all of them, just a few, but they were closer than they had been the day before, subtly, unmistakably, and the bark was bleeding. That evening, the elders sent a summons. The village could no longer deny the signs. The forest, once their shelter, was now a threat. Some believed the strangers had cursed the land. Others feared Nokomis had become a vessel for something ancient and vengeful. She was brought before the council fire. Elder Tokwa spoke first. The trees are bleeding. The river is still. The deer do not return. You sleep beside the ones who brought this, and you carry their mark. Explain yourself. Nokomis stood, her body stiff, eyes ringed with sleepless shadows. I am not with them, she said. I am watching them. Tokwa's eyes narrowed. And what have you learned? That Thorne isn't just a man, she said. He's something older, something bound to the forest, and he's searching for a heart that doesn't belong to him. Elder Miska raised her head slowly. The buried heart, she said. Tokwa scoffed. A child's tale. No, Miska said. An old one, older than the bloodlines. When the first trees were split by lightning, the land wept. Its sorrow took shape, a heart carved from grief and buried beneath the bloodroot. Anyone who finds it and feeds it will gain power enough to wake the forest or break it. Tokwa looked at Nokomis. Is that what he seeks? Yes, she said, and the forest wants it too. Then we must stop him, said Tokwa. Miska shook her head. You cannot stop what the land remembers. That night, Nokomis went to the edge of the bloodroot grove. The plants were pulsing, not just swaying, but visibly throbbing in time with some deep rhythm. The ground steamed faintly, and the roots had spread wider than before, covering more soil like a skin forming over a wound. As she stepped into the grove, the pain returned. In her palm, the ashwood figure burned cold against her skin. She opened her hand. The carving's eyes had turned black. You're close, came Thorne's voice behind her. She turned, heart racing. He stood with no torch, no light, and yet she could see him perfectly. I thought it was buried here, he said, looking at the roots. But it's not, she swallowed. Then where? He smiled. In you. Nokomis staggered back. What? You were born to someone who carried the forest's grief, Thorne said. Your mother passed it to you when she turned away. You were meant to be a vessel, and now the forest wants you to complete it. He stepped closer, eyes glowing faintly. I don't need to dig, he said. I just need to open you. He raised the bone dagger, but before he could move, the ground screamed. Not a metaphorical scream, a sound, high, raw, like the forest itself was howling in pain. Roots exploded from the ground between them, slamming Thorne backward. He hit the dirt hard, rolled, and vanished into the underbrush. And from the pulsing bloodroot came a single whisper. Run! Nokomis did. She fled deep into the silent wood, not toward the village, not toward the stranger's camp, but toward the one place her mother had forbidden her from ever entering. The hollow, a place beyond the oldest trees, where even animals would not step, said to be the mouth of the forest itself, where spirits with no names circled endlessly, whispering secrets that rotted the mind. It called to her now. She followed a path that didn't exist, and still her feet knew where to go. Each step brought more silence, more stillness, until even her own breath seemed too loud. And then she saw it, a clearing, empty, no trees, no birds, just a great stone circle, half buried in moss, and a hollow pit at its centre. A single shaft of moonlight lit the way down, and carved into the stone at the entrance, we bury what we fear. Inside the hollow, the air was colder than the river. The walls were carved with symbols Nokomis couldn't read. Eyes, branches, mouths, cages. At the centre of the pit lay a body, or what had once been one, wrapped in bark, bound with vines, its skull visible beneath a shattered mask, and in its chest, not a heart, but a stone, glowing red, beating, just like her dreams. Nokomis knelt beside it. She knew, without knowing how, that this was the source, not of evil, not of good, but of memory, the grief of the land made solid. She reached out, touched it, and in that moment saw everything. The first trees being cut, the spirits screaming as they were torn from soil, the stranger ships arriving again and again, pouring metal into water, digging into graves, her ancestors weeping, her mother turning away, clutching a baby, Nokomis, running from the forest demand, and Thorne. He had been many men. Each generation he returned, a fragment of the forest's anger, a mirror sent to tempt, to test, and this time it had chosen her. Nokomis opened her eyes. The hollow was shaking, and Thorne stood at the entrance. His eyes were white. His face was not his own anymore, shifting between hundreds, all pale, all wrong. "You found it," he whispered. "You are it." He stepped forward, and Nokomis rose. "I am not yours," she said. The stone floated between them, pulsing, and the forest, for the first time, was silent. The hollow held its breath. Nokomis stood at its centre, the grief stone floating between her and Thorne, its red pulse steady, slow, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Thorne's face flickered in the dim light. Once, he looked like the man she had first seen on the deck of the ghost ship, pale, golden-haired, fire-eyed. Then it changed, a face older, darker, bearded, weathered by sun and storm. Then again, a boy, barely older than she, wild-eyed, mouth smeared with soil. Again, dozens of faces, hundreds. Some she knew from old stories, others she'd never seen, but somehow remembered in the marrow of her bones, in the rustle of the trees at night. He was all of them, and none. "You are not Thorne," she whispered. He tilted his head, smiling faintly. "I am what the forest made to remember, to punish, to balance," he said, when her mother had carried her from the forest long ago. Nokomis now understood. She hadn't been fleeing a curse. She had been fleeing a choice. The blood in Nokomis's veins was not just her family's. It belonged to the old ones, the seed daughters, who could hear the earth not as sound, but as memory. They were born every few generations to carry the forest's pain, to contain it, or to feed it. Her mother had chosen containment, refusal, silence, but the forest did not forget, and now it had chosen her. She felt the grief stone hum in time with her pulse. It didn't want to be buried anymore. It wanted to become. You cannot stop what has already taken root, Thorne said softly. Your people dug too deep. They broke the pact. I am only what comes next. Nokomis stepped forward, her breath visible in the cold. I am not your vessel. No, he said. You are your mother's mistake, a broken thread, but I can make you whole again. The roots lining the hollow began to move, slow, serpent-like tendrils crawling down the walls, reaching toward Nokomis's feet. She stepped back. The grief stone followed her, pulsing faster now, as if scared or angry. You want the heart, she said, but it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the forest, Thorne said. Then let it rest. Thorne raised his hand, and the earth screamed. The sound was not just heard, it was felt. Bones shook, teeth ached, a cry of such ancient sorrow that even the hollow shuddered in reply. The roots surged toward her, but Nokomis didn't run. She turned to the body, the bark-wrapped corpse at the centre of the pit. Her mother had once spoken of the first daughter, a girl born before names, who had walked into the trees and never returned. The forest had made her a vessel too, and now she lay buried here, wrapped in vines. Nokomis reached down, tore the vines from her chest, and pressed her hand against the grief stone inside. Pain lanced through her body, pure and searing, but behind the pain was memory. She saw the first daughter's life, how the forest spoke to her in dreams, how she warned her people, begged them not to burn, not to carve, not to tear, how they did it anyway, and how she sacrificed herself, offered her heart willingly to bind the sorrow of the land, so it would not become rage, so it would not destroy everything. But the world had broken the pact, and now the sorrow had festered. Nokomis felt it rise in her, thick as sap, not just sorrow, hatred. Thorne was at her side now, hand outstretched. You feel it, don't you? That weight, that power. Give it to me. She looked at him, really looked, and saw the truth. He was not just a memory. He was the forest's mistake, a mirror shattered into countless faces, too many hosts, too many broken lines. He no longer served balance. He fed only on the wound, and now he wanted her to bleed for him. No, she said, and she pulled. The grief stone burst free from the corpse's chest, slamming into her own. It did not pierce flesh. It passed through it, straight into her heart. She screamed, not in pain, but in becoming. The world turned upside down. Her body fell, but her spirit rose. She stood now, within the mind of the forest. Endless trees, endless time. The deer stood beside her, blood pouring from its mouth. It bowed once and faded. The ancestors stood at the edge of the grove, faces hidden behind masks of bark. One stepped forward. Her mother. "I tried to spare you," she said, voice like wind through reeds. "But sorrow does not vanish. It waits." "I don't want this," Nokomis whispered. "You don't have to want it," her mother said. "Only understand it." She placed her hand on Nokomis's chest. The grief stone pulsed. When Nokomis awoke, the hollow was in ruins. Thorne lay crumpled at the edge of the pit. The roots had retracted, curling away from her. She stood. The stone was gone, but she felt it inside her now. Not a weapon, a weight. She dragged Thorne's body back to the village by nightfall. The elders came out in silence. She dropped him at the edge of the fire. "He is no longer one of us," she said. "He is what comes when the wound is ignored." They looked at the man, still breathing, barely. His face flickering between lives, no longer able to hold shape. "What do we do with him?" someone whispered. Nokomis's voice was calm. "We bury what we fear." At sunrise, they returned to the hollow. This time, she led them. Together, they laid Thorne in the pit. No ritual, no song, only silence. As the soil covered him, the wind returned, softer, sadder, but no longer angry. And when it passed through the trees, the forest finally exhaled. The forest was silent for 3 days. Not dead, merely still, like a beast nursing a wound too deep to lick clean. The wind no longer groaned through the trees. The birds returned in thin flocks. The deer emerged again, eyes watchful, cautious, but present. Even the river regained its clarity, though its current moved with the slow exhaustion of something that had just woken from a nightmare. The village called it a blessing. Nokomis knew better. It was a pause. The forest was watching and waiting. She did not sleep much after the burial. When she closed her eyes, she saw through different ones, deep-set, ancient, peering through bark. When she sat in the dirt, she heard more than insects. She heard secrets shifting beneath roots, and when she touched the trees, they leaned toward her now, not with malice, but with expectation. The grief stone lived in her chest, not a physical thing. It had dissolved into her heart, like sap into wood, but its presence was constant, like a second pulse. It beat slower than her own, a rhythm that matched the breath of the earth, and it whispered, not with words, but with need. On the 4th day, a girl came to her hut, barely older than a child, skin marked with fresh scratches from wandering the forest paths. She said nothing, simply knelt, bowed her head, and laid a bundle at Nokomis's feet. It was a woven crown of cedar bark and bloodroot. Nokomis recoiled. "Why are you giving me this?" The girl looked up, eyes wide. because you are the forest daughter now. That evening she burned the crown in silence. The villagers watched from afar, whispering. Some of them bowed when she passed, others refused to look at her. A few left offerings outside her home, feathers, carved bones, ash-stained water. One woman cut her own hand and painted symbols on Nokomis' door. You walk between now, the woman whispered. Bless my son. I am no spirit, Nokomis said. The woman smiled, hollow-eyed. Not yet. She went to Elder Miska the next morning. The old woman sat alone, weaving roots into strange, coiled shapes Nokomis did not recognize. You were right, Nokomis said. It doesn't feel like power, it feels like grief. Miska nodded, not looking up. That's what the old ones feared most. Not fire, not war, but a sorrow that never ends. What do I do with it? Miska paused. Feed it truth, she said at last. Not vengeance, not silence. Speak its name. Let it burn through lies. And if the people don't want to hear it, then let the forest decide who listens. Later that day, the river brought something unexpected. A new ship, smaller than the last, with only 5 men aboard. They wore no armour, carried no thundersticks. They bore white banners and held their hands high as they approached. We come for the ones who vanished, their leader said in broken words. Nokomis stood at the water's edge, watching them from beneath her hood. You mean Thorne? They looked confused. Captain Thorne, yes. Did he pass through here? She said nothing. Behind her the trees creaked faintly. The men looked nervous. We were told this land was empty. It was, Nokomis said, until it remembered what had been taken. They left by nightfall, empty-handed and pale-faced. The forest let them go. This time, that night, Nokomis dreamed not of blood, but of rot, roots bursting from her chest, her skin flaking like birch bark, her tongue replaced with vines. In the dream, the villagers crowned her with bones and called her Mother Hollow. When she woke, her hands smelled of earth, and her sister stood in the doorway, afraid to speak. I don't want you to die like her, the girl whispered. Nokomis crossed the room and knelt up beside her. I'm not dying, but you're not you anymore. Nokomis paused, then said the only thing she could. I'm what the land needs. By the next moon, change began to settle. The trees regrew their leaves, thicker, darker. The animals returned, but they watched Nokomis with something deeper than instinct, reverence, fear, kinship. And the villagers, they began to divide. Some wanted to honour Nokomis as a holy woman, to build shrines, to chant her name at the river bend. Others whispered of exile, of danger, of possession. One night, someone left a deer skull at her door. Carved into its forehead were the words, Mother of roots, bringer of rot. She buried it in silence. It was not Thorne who haunted her now. It was the villagers. They looked at her the way people look at storm clouds. Some prayed, some shut their doors, some sharpened blades. Even the elders grew quiet. One morning, Elder Tokwa came to her in secret. "We are afraid of you," he said simply. "You should be," Nokomis replied, "but not for the reason you think." He said nothing for a long time. Then, "You carry something that could save us, or unmake us." "I carry what you buried," she said. "You broke the pact, not me." Tokwa bowed his head and left. The forest spoke more clearly now. Nokomis no longer needed dreams. The whispers came when she bathed in the river, when she touched the trees, when she sat still long enough to feel the weight of things unseen. They told her of storms still to come, of villages beyond the hills that had already begun to burn, of men in boats with red flags and iron skin. The land would be taken again, unless something stopped it. One morning, she stood at the edge of the silent wood. She had braided her hair with ash branches, painted her face with river clay, and carved a symbol into her palm, a circle of roots wrapping around a single eye, a mark not of power but of remembrance. She walked into the trees. They parted for her, and the wind whispered, "It is time to plant what was never allowed to grow." The trees remembered what people had chosen to forget. Every scar, every stump, every bone buried in shallow soil. Nokomis walked deeper into the forest now, not as a trespasser, but as a returning thought. The earth bent beneath her steps, like it knew her weight. Branches leaned inward when she passed, and when she whispered, the leaves listened. She did not wander blindly. The forest showed her where to go. It had begun with a bird, one with white feathers and eyes black as oil, that landed on her shoulder at sunrise. It did not flinch when she moved. It only looked north, then flew. She followed. For 3 days, she moved through woods untouched by axe or fire, streams cold as bone, moss-covered stones etched with glyphs too old to name. She passed trees with their bark peeled in spirals, marks left by seed daughters who had once walked this path long before her. And on the 3rd night, she found the others. There were 5 of them, camped at the edge of a river that had no name. All were women, all marked, not in paint or cloth, but in bearing. Their eyes were tired in the way deep roots are tired, from holding too much for too long. One looked up as Nokomis approached. "You heard it too," she said. Nokomis nodded. None of them asked her name. Names were small things now. That night, they sat around a fire of green wood and bone. No one spoke until the flames burned violet. Then the eldest, a woman with silver scars down her cheeks, leaned forward and said, "They think we are ghosts." "They want us to be," said another. "To keep their hands clean," a third added. "If they forget what the land remembers, then they never have to atone." Nokomis looked into the fire. "The land is not asking for atonement." They turned toward her. "It wants to speak," she said. The next morning they set out together. They went not to the village, but to the outposts, the fringes where other peoples lived, those the river folk rarely spoke of, the ones who traded with steel and glass, who wore woven hats and brought gods carved in foreign wood. The grief stone guided Nokomis, now no longer a burden but a compass. It pulsed whenever lies were told. In one village, a man claimed his ancestors had never felled trees. The stone burned in her chest. In another, a hunter laughed at her talk of balance. His hand turned black the next morning. Word spread quickly, not just of Nokomis, but of the daughters of the Hollow, witch women, curse bearers, seed singers. Some opened their gates and begged for blessing. Others drew bows. Not all were spared. Meanwhile, back home, fear was growing. When Nokomis returned briefly to gather herbs, she found her village changed. The offerings at her door had stopped. Someone had etched a warning on the stone near her hut. The seed rots if planted in blood. Elder Tokwa no longer met her eyes. Her aunt had moved away. Her sister would not come out of her hut. And worse still, others had begun claiming to speak for the forest. A young man, Kanim, who had once shadowed her like a curious pup, now stood in the centre of the village each dusk, chanting twisted versions of the forest teachings. "The land wants dominion," he shouted. "The forest seeks sacrifice. Burn the impure." Crowds gathered. Some cheered, some trembled. Nokomis confronted him. "You do not speak for the roots." He grinned. "The roots speak to anyone willing to bleed." He raised his palm, freshly cut. The blood dripped onto a mound of earth, and the grass around it withered. He turned to the crowd. "She has gone soft. She walks among strangers. She lets ghosts rot beneath our feet." He pointed at Nokomis. "She would have us kneel, but the forest does not kneel. It consumes." The next night, her hut burned. No one saw who lit the fire. No one stopped it. Nokomis did not weep. She gathered the ashes in a pouch and returned to the forest. But something had shifted. The grief stone pulsed now, not only with sorrow, but with anger. The daughters gathered again, now 10 in number. Nokomis told them what had happened. They listened, then said, "We must choose, speak or strike." Nokomis stared into the fire. The faces of her people flashed behind her eyes. Her sister, eyes full of fear. Tokwa, weathered and weary. Kanim, wild with ambition. If she struck, the forest would rise. It would win, but it would leave nothing standing. If she only spoke, would they listen? She reached into her pouch and pulled the ashes from her burned home, let them fall into the fire, then said, "We teach one last time." They returned to the village on the new moon. No fire, no chanting, only silence. Nokomis stood in the central clearing, under the twisted hanging tree, the place where elders once passed judgment. She opened her palm, showed the scar, let the forest speak, and the roots answered. Beneath the soil, the ground trembled. From every hut vines rose, not to harm, but to lift, to reveal what had been hidden. Bones, teeth, rotting seeds. The village gasped. Kanim tried to shout, but the wind stole his voice. Nokomis stepped forward. "This is your truth," she said, "buried beneath your feet. You say the forest consumes, but it does not ask for blood, it asks for memory." She walked to the centre, knelt, and pressed her hand into the earth. The grief stone pulsed once, then released a sound, not a roar, a song, low, old, wordless, but every villager wept, even Kanim, even her sister, even Tokwa, and the forest listened. That night, the trees did not whisper, they sang, they began to listen. Not all, not fully, but enough. In the weeks that followed Nokomis's return, the village quieted, the shouting stopped, the offerings resumed, not of blood or bone, but of stories. Children gathered near the old trees to hear Nokomis tell them the truth of the first daughter, of the forest's sorrow, of what it meant to carry memory instead of running from it. She did not speak as a priest. She spoke as a wound that had chosen not to fester, and slowly the land responded. The bloodroot stopped pulsing with sickness. The animals no longer fled from the edge of the trees, and for the first time in many moons, the river sang. But not all roots grow straight. Kanim vanished the day after the song. Some said he had gone into the northern grove, a place where no bird sang and no sun touched the ground. Others whispered he'd crossed the river and entered the hollow alone. Nokomis feared both might be true. One night, the daughters gathered again, now 13 in number. They came bearing pieces of forest memory, bark etched with visions, bones that hummed when held, herbs that wilted in the presence of lies. "The land heals," said one, "but something twists beneath it still," said another. "There is rot yet uncut." They all looked to Nokomis. She felt it too. The grief stone no longer pulsed steadily. Now it flared in warning. At night, she dreamed of someone else standing where she once stood, in the clearing, beneath the hanging tree, with vines coiling lovingly around their throat. And when she awoke, she was no longer sure it was just a dream. That morning, her sister was gone. No one had seen her leave. Her sleeping mat was still warm. Her footprints trailed only halfway to the forest before vanishing completely. But Nokomis found what others missed, carved into the side of the old cedar near the river. You taught her to listen. Now she's heard too much. The words bled sap. She went to the forest alone, not to ask for help, but to ask for permission. And it answered, beneath the hanging moss and the skeletal trees, a new path unfurled, a trail, not of dirt, but of memory. Each step she took conjured voices from the past. "This land was not given," whispered a voice. "It was taken." "Not all wounds show blood," hissed another. "Some hide in names." "You carry what we buried," wept a third. "Do not bury it again." She followed the path, until it vanished, and there, in the middle of the glade, where she had once seen Thorne smile like a devil in borrowed skin, stood a figure, not her sister, not Canim, something else. It was tall, thin, wrapped in bark that looked like skin stretched too tight. Its face was a hollow where black sap oozed instead of eyes. It smelled like lightning on burned soil, but it spoke in her sister's voice. "Noko, miss!" She stepped forward. "What are you?" The figure trembled. Its head jerked sideways. "We are what you left behind." The grief stone in Nokomis' chest burned cold. "Where is my sister?" The thing pointed to the ground. Nokomis fell to her knees, clawing at the dirt. After only a few inches, she found her sister's necklace, the little blue bead she'd carved herself, still warm, still pulsing, not dead, but buried, alive, bound. She pressed her hand into the soil. The forest whispered, "Memory must not be twisted." The bark thing lunged. Nokomis didn't run. She opened. The grief stone flared. From the trees, vines struck like spears, piercing the figure through, hoisting it into the air. It writhed, shrieked, but not with pain, with rage. "You buried us once," it howled. "You'll bury us again." "No," Nokomis said softly. She walked to it, raised her hand, and pressed her palm to its hollow face. "You are not grief. You are what happens when grief is ignored." The bark cracked, light bled out, and the creature withered. Its bark peeled, revealing not a monster, but a young man's face beneath. "Canim." His mouth parted, but no breath came. The vines lowered the body to the earth, and as Nokomis knelt, she saw more than flesh. She saw the mirror. He had become what she might have if she had chosen vengeance, if she had let the wound define her. The grief stone dimmed, the earth sighed, and nearby, her sister's voice cried out, muffled beneath the roots. Nokomis dug fast, hands bleeding, found her, bound in vines, sleeping, unharmed but dreaming. She whispered her name. The girl stirred, opened her eyes, and wept. They returned to the village before sunset. Nokomis carried Canim's body in her arms. No one spoke. No one needed to. They buried him at the foot of the ancestor tree, not as a traitor, but as a warning. She carved no name, only the word, unlistened. That night, Nokomis lit no fire. She stood beneath the stars and looked toward the north. There would be more, others like Canim, men who confused grief with power, who twisted memory into weapons. The forest would not always be quiet, but now it had a voice again, and Nokomis had no fear of the silence. The forest no longer whispered, it waited. Spring had come, but the trees wore no new leaves. The river flowed, but it carried no fish. The sun rose each day, pale and weak, like a candle guttering in a long hallway. Nokomis felt it in her blood. A pause, not peace. The grief stone no longer pulsed in anger or sorrow. Instead, It listened, like it too was uncertain of what must come next. She had buried Canim. She had spoken the truth. She had returned her sister to the waking world. And still, something was missing. It was Elder Miska who finally said it aloud. "You've bound the wound," she told Nokomis, seated in the grove where the roots now grew wide and flat like scar tissue. "But you haven't healed it." "I don't know how," Nokomis admitted. Miska nodded slowly. "You do," she said. "You're just afraid of what it will cost." That night, Nokomis walked alone. No daughters, no villagers, no sister at her side. Only the trees, the hush of wind, and the weight she had carried so long. It no longer felt foreign. She returned to the hollow, not to bury anything, but to plant. The pit, where Thorne had once been laid, was now overgrown, though no grass dared grow atop the stone. The body had rotted, returned, nothing remained. She stepped inside. The grief stone pulsed once, then went silent, not in warning, in acceptance. She knelt, and for the first time she dug, not to bury, not to unearth, but to make room. She reached into her pouch, removed a single seed, smooth, black, warm to the touch. It was not from this world. It had grown in her, a piece of the sorrow, but also something more, hope maybe, or at least memory, refined. She pressed it into the soil and whispered the word, "Live." The forest held its breath, and then, slowly, the trees began to sing. Not a song of triumph, but a lullaby, low, ancient, without melody, a sound like roots growing, like rain on leaves, like fire turning old wood into ash. The stars above flickered, the moss beneath her feet glowed faintly, pulsing in time with her heartbeat, and all around her things began to change. The bloodroot shrank back, not in fear, but in relief. The vines that once had strangled the graves now grew in spirals, no longer cages, but cradles. The air smelled not of rot, but of remembrance, and the forest exhaled. Nokomis returned at dawn. The village was already stirring. People gathered as she passed, not to kneel, not to bow, but to stand beside her. Even Tokwa, his face worn and wet with tears, placed a hand on her shoulder. "We heard it," he said. "I didn't do it alone," she replied. He nodded. "No one ever does." The next season, the daughters scattered. Some remained, walking the edge between forest and field. Others left, carrying seeds of memory to other lands where other wounds had festered too long. Nokomis stayed. She did not rule. She did not preach. She planted, in soil, in hearts, in story. She taught the children how to listen for trees that speak. She taught the elders how to remember what was once silenced. And sometimes, on quiet nights, she sat alone in the glade, of the first daughter, where now a sapling grew. Its leaves were dark as ink, its branches reached upward like hands once clenched in grief, now open, and Nokomis would sit there beneath its shade, not waiting, not mourning, just being. One evening, her sister asked, "Will the forest ever forget?" Nokomis smiled, "No." "Then what will we do when it hurts again?" She looked up at the branches swaying gently overhead. "We listen." In time, the forest changed, but it never closed its eyes again. Not as long as someone remembered. Not as long as someone walked barefoot across its roots, whispering truth into the dirt. Not as long as the song continued. We bury what we fear. We grow what we remember. We become what we carry. And in the shade of that tree, Nokomis whispered her last words to the land. "I am not your wound. I am your witness." And the forest answered, "Then you are never alone."